Chapter 9, Part 2. They never got to Fairhaven that day at least, for in the afternoon dark blue clouds, shaped like cauliflowers, heaped above the woods, and it began to rain. Rumbles of thunder rolled about the sky, and the leaded windows ran with raindrops. Harry made his way to the kitchen. "Hello, love." Mrs. Good looked up from the big scrub table where she was baking. Pounds of butter and bags of flour and packets of dried fruit stood all around. "Help yourself to some juice or milk, they're in the fridge." Harry poured a glass of apricot crush and stood watching. "But it's raining so soon after you've arrived too. Stale. I dare say it won't last long." Mrs. Good smiled. "What do you say to some nice hot scone?" Yes, please. Do you want to lend a hand?" "I don't know what to do." He was embarrassed. "Gestapo Lil never let me in the kitchen, except to do the washing up." "Never let you?" Mrs. Good was shocked. "Well, I can't say anything about that, lady, but you're welcome in the kitchen here any time." She gave him a big motherly hug, which Harry quite liked. "Oh dear," she laughed. "Now I've gone and got you all floury. Stand still a minute." With a dishcloth and towel, she dusted him down. "A bit streaky, but it'll all come out in the wash." They moved to the table. "Let me see your hands." Harry held them out. Tap. She pushed them towards the sink. "And a good scrub under those nails. You've got half the wood in there." When he returned, rubbing his hands on his jeans, Mrs. Good said, "I've got an idea. Why don't you make the scones, give everyone a surprise, and I'll get on with the evening meal?" Harry stared at her. "I'll show you what to do. There's nothing to it. Here." She pulled forward a mixing bowl. So while Mrs. Good chopped meat and made pastry for a steak pie, scrubbed potatoes and carrots, topped strawberries, and started a cake for Finger's birthday, Harry made some scones. Precisely. He weighed out the ingredients, though Mrs. Good never seemed to bother, and he mixed them with a spoon. The result was a sticky and stickier mess. Mrs. Good laughed. "Another handful of flour, and stop picking at those currants." Like magic, the mixture turned into a dough. Harry rolled it out and cut the scones with an ancient beer glass. Carefully, he arranged them on 2 greased trays and put them in the oven. "Probably turn out like rock cakes," he said. "Nonsense, they'll be delicious." Thunder rumbled above the kitchen garden. Tangle wandered in and snapped up the tag ends of meat that Harry dangled above his nose. Contentedly, he settled on a rug near the door, a favourite spot from where he could keep an eye on all that happened in the passage and hall beyond. Harry turned the pages of a battered cookery book. "See if the scones are ready, love." He opened the oven door. A blast of hot air hit him in the face. The currant scones stood golden brown like kings. He was astonished. "I think so." Mrs. Good joined him. "Perfect," she said. "You take them out. Here, use this cloth. Then turn it down to 4, and I'll pop in the cake." 5 minutes later, Harry and Mrs. Good were perched on stools at a corner of the table, tucking in to big mugs of tea and hot scones filled with melted butter. "Hey, these are good." Harry spoke with his mouth full. "You made them. Maybe you're going to be a chef." Mrs. Good smiled. "Have another." Harry examined the wire cooling tray and chose one like a lopsided top hat. "You know, last night," he'd been putting off asking, "last night I was in the drawing room late." Her eyes twinkled. "Well, they told me about everybody, what they did and everything, but not Aunt Bridget." "It's because you fell asleep and they shot you off the bed. And you'd like to know now?" Harry licked the butter from his knife. "Well, your Aunt Bridget's behind the whole thing, isn't she?" said Mrs. Good. "She's the brains. Got a mind like a computer. Plans every job down to the very last detail. Never forgets a thing. She used to be a lecturer at Oxford. Did you know that?" Harry shook his head. "I think she might have been a professor, very high up anyway." Mrs. Good gathered some crumbs and popped them between her lips. "National bridge champion she is now." "Oh yes, ever so clever." "Well, you just have to look at her to see that." "But if she was a professor, how did she come to meet all the others? I mean, Dot's a cat burglar, Fingers is a safe breaker, Max is a con man. Was it through Auntie Florrie? She used to drive a getaway car. She still does. She's got one in the garage. Was it through her?" "Oh no, love, you've got it the other way round. It was your Auntie Bridget. Your Aunt Bridget was the naughty one. She's so clever, she was. She wanted to pit her wits against the detectives. Formed her own little gang in Oxford, all women. Sapphire, they called themselves. The Sapphire Lady Adventurers. So, of course, it was handy for Bridget, having her sister, the top woman driver in Europe. Very successful they were too. So daring. Got headlines in all the papers, and never anything nasty. Ever so popular they were. Made everybody laugh. But in the end, they got caught, of course. One trick too many, so they all ended up in Holloway. That's the ladies' prison in London. They were naughty, I know that, but everyone was so sad." I like the name Sapphire, said Harry. Well, there's a reason for that, said Mrs. Good. There were 7 of them, see, all from different backgrounds. One girl was a nurse, another was a sweeper up in a factory, there was a primary school teacher and a vicar's wife. I can't remember the rest, but by chance they all had one thing in common. As well as being daring and ever so nice, they all had blue eyes like yourself. So they called themselves Sapphire. The Sapphire 7. Harry was eyeing the tray of scones. Go on, she pushed them towards him, your young appetite. But that's the last, else you'll have no room for your dinner. So Aunt Bridget and Auntie Florrie were both in prison. He dug into the butter. Wasn't it crooks you called everybody last night? Mrs. Good laughed. Yes, they were. They'd been naughty and they paid the price. It must have been horrid. But your Aunt Bridget and Auntie Florrie are very special people, said Mrs. Good. You must realise that already. Your Auntie Florrie organised classes in driving and car maintenance so the women could get jobs as taxi drivers and van delivery girls when they got out. And your Aunt Bridget started a school. Never had a chance, most of the inmates, poor souls. Put them through all their exams, she did, so they could get jobs as secretaries and office girls when they'd done their stretch. The prison governor said they both should have got an OBE when they got out for all the good work they did. Harry was impressed. But your Aunt Bridget was the one, Mrs. Good laughed. Have you heard of Mastermind? On the TV, the quiz programme? That's it. Well, because of the work she was doing, the governor let her go to the BBC for trials. Nobody from the Nick could have any chance, they thought. Well, didn't she go and win the title outright that year? Mastermind, with everyone shaking her by the hand and the guards going wild in the audience and millions of people watching. So exciting it was. Then there was a banquet, with Bridget guest of honour. Then they put the handcuffs back on, loaded her into a Black Maria and took her back to the cell. Harry was thrilled. His aunt, a mastermind. What subject did she choose? Well, for the final, it was the life and times of great British criminals. She had a nerve. Mrs. Good laughed again. And before that, it was prison reform and something like the mathematics of philosophy. I couldn't understand a word of it. She pointed through the house. The winner gets a lovely crystal bowl. You'll find it hidden in that corner cupboard in the drawing room. She doesn't like it on display. She thinks it looks showy. Harry had finished his scone. Elbows on the table, he patted his bristly hair with a palm. How long were you in there for? Well, how long were they in there for? Well, the judge gave them 15 years. Can you imagine? 15 years! And a recommendation that they should serve every one of them. There was national outcry. The appeal cut it down to 8, so with good behaviour. They were out after 5. That was the difference. 15 years and 5, said Harry. When you said the judge like that, did you mean... You're quick on the uptake, aren't you? That's right, love. Colonel Priestley. Beastly Priestley. Mrs. Good's good-natured face took on a frown. A right nasty piece of work, that man. The things I've heard about him. So unfair. And he's bent as a fourpenny piece himself, I tell you. If I had him here for 10 minutes, I'd not half give him a piece of my mind. I'd like to... The kindly housekeeper took a mouthful of tea to calm herself down. Everybody seems to hate him, said Harry. What else has he done? Don't let me start. Your aunties can tell you all that. She rubbed the rosy cheek with her fingertips. Where was I? Oh, yes. Well, it was while they were there in Holloway that your Aunt Bridget had the idea for this place. Lag Hall? That's right, yes, Lag Hall. Well, you know what an old lag is, don't you? Is it something to do with water pipes? No, that's lagging, love. No, an old lag is a convict, a jailbird, someone who's done time, lived at Her Majesty's expense. That's why they renamed this place Lag Hall, because they're old lags. What, all of them? All jailbirds? Yep, except Nutty and me, yes. Harry thought about this. What was it called before? The house? Well, if you look at the old maps, you'll see it called the Hermitage. That's what drew your Aunt Bridget's attention to it. A nice hideaway for them all to live, to be safe when they got out. Sapphire? Well, some of them, but others too. Fingals and angels aren't very ladylike, are they? Harry smiled. So what was that the idea? A sort of retirement home for prisoners? Not exactly, love. And who said anything about retirement? You heard them last night, didn't you? No. All those that were interested in the big idea had a bit of money stashed away somewhere, under floorboards, buried in forests, plastered up in walls, sunk in lakes, that sort of thing. And they clubbed together and bought this place. It was all very run down. Seeing it now, you can't imagine. Wallpaper hanging off, windows boarded up, crow's nests in the chimneys, ivy everywhere, trees growing right up to the front door. A lot of work it was. Harry gazed round the comfortable kitchen and thought of the beautiful hall and drawing room along the passage. Beyond the window, bright flower beds and rows of vegetables drank in the summer rain. But what was Aunt Bridget's great idea? Let me tell you. A voice at the door made Harry jump out of his skin.